he can put huge pressure on Russia, unlike anyone else. I think they're looking for an exit plan. Putin is useful to China in some ways, but I don't think that he's very, very important for China's other big aims. I think for Russia, it's terribly demeaning. North Korea, I think they once thought this was just a sort of little speck on their great global map.
Vladimir Putin's high-stakes relationship with China is under serious strain. As the war in Ukraine drags on, Moscow has found itself fundamentally dependent on Beijing for economic survival. Bilateral trade between Russia and China has soared 55% to $255 billion since the 2022 invasion. But behind the handshakes, President Xi Jinping is playing a long game, and Putin may have just made his biggest mistake.
I'm Professor of Chinese Studies at King's College London, and I'm the director of the Lao China Institute there. So a lot of the causes of that are, two things. First, the war of Russia against Ukraine means that it doesn't have many trading partners now. So China is the largest. Its trade with Europe and America has significantly declined. The second is that China is a big user of energy, and some of that energy inevitably comes from Russia, a lot of gas and other kind of energy resources. So, that really drives it. For Russia, China is a lifeline. Without its trading links with the People's Republic, there'd be very few others that it's able to really trade with at the moment. The relationship is an extremely realistic one. They're not really culturally and even ideologically that close, but they share a massive border. I think it's the world's fourth or fifth longest border. And they really have lots of incentives to get on at a pragmatic level, even though they don't really see eye to eye. Europe, even under Putin, Russia is a European power in its mindset. Putin is an Orthodox Christian. The Communist Party of China is an atheist party, and he doesn't really have the same kind of value set. So I don't think they're deep partners, but they're partners that have lots of reasons to get on with each other, not least because it works for China's favor that Russia is a bit beholden to them, even though, of course, China has very, very significant relations with almost everyone now, and Russia is just a part of that. So I'd say finally this is a very unequal relationship. China is a way bigger economy, way more powerful as a military force, and way more significant geopolitically. So this is not a relationship of equals, whatever else it is. Its economy is, about 15% of the size of China's. It's a nuclear power, so it's not like Russia is insignificant. But I don't think that China is looking for Russia to be beholden to it, to kind of be like a client state, because I don't think it wants those responsibilities too. It doesn't want to kind of fight, Russia's wars for it. So I think what it's really looking at is a kind of very pragmatic, loose, win-win relationship where Russia is not causing it major problems, but also not really demanding a lot of it. You could say at the moment that Russia is depending a lot on China, and China has had to burn up a bit of political capital to sort of justify its relationship with Russia. But I think China is willing to pay at least that price because it wants to be an independent foreign policy actor in a world where, many have to be constantly looking over their shoulder at other powers. So I think China's willing to do these things, but there are limits. So what China is not going to object to is NATO and the West sort of being embroiled in, kind of energy sapping sort of political and military issues because of Russia-Ukraine. It's no friend of NATO. China is not a friend of NATO. But it's not a diehard friend of Russia. That's what a lot of people might assume, but it really isn't. It has bigger fish to fry. So I don't think it really sees the Russia-Ukraine thing as such an existential issue in the way the West does. It thinks, well, okay, it's just Europeans having another fight amongst themselves, but there are kind of limits because Russia, China has significant domestic issues. in terms of its economy, its demographics, even its politics. It's not as strong as people think it is in many ways. And I think it's pretty keen to focus on those. I don't think Russia is going to be, a big ally in that. It helps in some ways with its energy provision. The same with Ukraine. But China has very, very huge ambitions and demands. I think what it would really like is to see this conflict wrapped up at some point as a sort of draw, with Russia, and Ukraine both going away sort of saying that they won, which neither really have won, but they haven't lost. I think that's the sort of balance that China is really looking at. It doesn't want to see an eternal war. It doesn't want to see, Russia smashing the hell out of Ukraine and kind of getting all arrogant and sort of puffed up. It just wants a neutral outcome so that it can continue doing what it is, its main priority is, which is competing with the United States, dealing with its domestic issues, and focusing on its aims about Taiwan. He can put huge pressure on Russia, unlike anyone else. Whether he will is another matter, but he can certainly put very significant pressure on Russia. And he probably doesn't have to do a great deal to really, really, ramp things up. All he's got to do is basically say to Putin, look, we need sort of like to calm this thing down now because it's impacting on all of our interests, and we really need more stability, and kind of doing it in a sort of diplomatic way. You could probably do that very easily, and it would probably have impact.
Russia has leaned heavily on North Korea, trading highly classified military secrets in exchange for soldiers and millions of artillery shells. But this desperate diplomacy strategy has backfired. The use of combat troops in Ukraine has dragged North Korea directly into the Western spotlight. By bringing NATO's focus to China's Pacific doorstep through his North Korean deals, Putin has forced Beijing's hand. To pull Kim Jong-un back into line, President Xi recently made a rare state visit to Pyongyang, reasserting Beijing's absolute dominance over the country that acts like a buffer state on its northeastern border.
I don't think that China is happy with North Korea being involved with this and having troops going and fighting for Russia. China does not regard North Korea as a particularly helpful neighbor. They're not that close, even though Xi Jinping has recently been to North Korea. I mean, they just understand that the alternatives is to have a sort of America-dominated, Korean peninsula, so they definitely don't want that. Or to have, a kind of North Korea that is imploding, and they don't really want that. So I think that they're just looking for balance all round. Putin is useful to China in some ways, but I don't think that he's very, very important, for China's other big aims. And so I don't think they're going to pull the plug on him. I mean, no, because they don't want his foes to kind of do particularly well too. The last thing they want is NATO and Europe to sort of believe that they're kind of all conquering and all powerful. But I think that they do want, things to basically start to kind of calm down and just I think they're looking for an exit plan. North Korea has got a pretty autonomous stance. And as I say, I don't think China would be particularly happy with the troops going. But I think that for North Korea, it's a great opportunity to get combat experience and also to diversify its alliances, because it's very dependent on China. I think it's 90% of its trade is with China. So this is opening up new allies, and it's not something that China can particularly veto, because it's also supporting, the Russian, it's a sort of soft ally of Russia, as we've just sort of said. So I think for Kim Jong-un, this is it's been a good opportunity. I think for Russia, it's terribly demeaning. I don't think the Russians are at all kind of happy with the dependence on North Korea. I think they once thought this was just a sort of little speck, on their great global map. And well, if you read body language, I don't think Putin was enjoying himself particularly, kind of being feted by Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. I don't think that I can't really see this one being a particularly good or easy relationship. But I think North Korea has proved under Kim Jong-un being extremely adept at, kind of taking these opportunities. He has pretty much, got what he wants, which is nuclear weapons, combat experience for his troops, global influence, and the United States and China don't really know what the hell to do about this problem. So pretty effective, I'd say. Alas, it's not something I'm particularly happy about, but this has been a extremely effective kind of strategy by the North Korean leader. So far, I think it's looking good for him.
The friction is even showing on the ground. In North Korea's strategic race-on economic zone, a major new road bridge over the Tumen River has missed its highly anticipated June 2026 deadline. The goal was to connect North Korea and Russia by road for the first time to facilitate trade. While North Korea rushed to complete its side, Russia's custom facilities and connecting roads remain unfinished and hopelessly behind schedule, causing deep diplomatic frustration in Pyongyang.
I mean, it might be that, and it might be just lack of capacity. I mean, look, we're looking at a Russia which is under a lot of stress and not able to do things. It's paid a price for this war. So I think the failure of delivery of things like this might be symptomatic of that, and also maybe a bit of foot dragging. I mean, it's maybe not really that committed to doing these things because it's not committed to the relationship. But it has to sort of basically play lip service. So I think it's a combination of that. Russia is definitely diminished by this war. It's paid a huge price for it. And that's something that China will be noticing and be observing. If China were to make a move on Taiwan, it would be an enormous event, way more than Russia's attack on Ukraine. So although people talk about China having a plan in 2027 to do something, I'm skeptical that they would do anything dramatic because they have massive, they have a lot to lose. If they were to attack Taiwan, it's still very likely that America would come to Taiwan's aid. It's still very likely that there would be international outrage. And it's still likely that China would not find this easy. I mean, it's got an enormous military now. It's got the economic and, plenty of capacity, but it would lose a lot too. And I think it looks at how Russia has struggled so much in Ukraine and how the war there has now gone on longer than the First World War. If China were to get embroiled in something like that, it would be a disaster for China, for Taiwan, and for the world. So I think that China's got a plan probably, but it's a very long-term plan. I don't think it's certainly not the next few years. As we get into the 2030s, then it becomes more real, but that's dependent on China's economic performance and a lot of other things. China is a rational actor. It is not a gambler. If it's going to make a move, it will make a move when it's pretty certain that it will be able to achieve its aims. That means that America will not be involved. So we're not there at all yet now because America is still very involved. And also that domestic opinion on Taiwan might be more favorable. Today, those don't, apply. It's really not going to be accepted. But amazing things are happening in this world at the moment. And 5 years' time, 10 years' time, well, then, it's going to be potentially very, very different and maybe possible.